Every one of us gets 24 hours in a day. What we choose to do with those 24 hours is related to how we manage our time. Time management overall is a skill that can improve our lives on multiple fronts. It can improve our personal lives, it can improve our professional lives, and it can absolutely improve our academic lives. So, what is time management? Well, as I said, every one of us gets 24 hours in a day. And time management is more than just making sure we show up somewhere on time. It's really about goals, how we set goals, how we define goals, and how we approach the tasks required to meet each of those goals. It's important to remember that we should be setting both big goals and small goals for ourselves. As a student, a big goal could be to finish college, especially now that you've started down the path with taking classes. And that's a fantastic goal. However, if you leave it at that, finish college, it can have an overwhelming sense to it as a goal. So what you really want to do is break that big goal down into smaller goals that are much more manageable. The small goals, however, could also be independent of a big goal. So for instance, if your big goal is to finish college, you could break that down into smaller goals, like I want to complete this semester's worth of classes. I want to do well in this semester. You might even label it that with a particular GPA that you want to have by the end of the semester. And that is certainly more manageable than saying I'm going to finish college. However, it's still kind of big. So you could break that down even further and address each individual class that you're taking and state, I want to do well in my math class, for instance. And you might set a goal for yourself that you want to get even a particular grade in that class. We can use that then to break down even further and look at particular assignments in each class. Think about the grades that you want to get on particular assignments. You might add the additional smaller goal of wanting to learn as much as you can about the subject of whichever class it is that you're addressing. But you can also have smaller goals that are independent of a big goal. I want to make sure I pay all of my bills on time this month. You look at then the components of that, and you can break that down even further by identifying the bills that you have to pay, looking at the due dates, how much each bill is, and setting smaller component goals to that small goal of paying all of your bills on time. So let's look at the big picture. Really, when we're looking at time management, it comes down to having a plan. For academic success, which is what we're talking about here, you really need to know how much time you should allow for your studies. Now, there's a standard guideline that you should allow at least 2 hours of homework for every hour of class time. So if we look at a schedule and a student is taking 12 credits, that's 12 credit hours of class time each week. If you allow for at least 2 hours of homework for each of those hours of class time, that means you should allow for at least 24 additional hours for homework. Now, as you all know, there are some classes that may require less than those 2 hours per hour of class time. There are other classes that may require more than those 2 hours of class time. but you should ideally plan on at least 2 hours of homework time for every hour of class time. Now, what is homework? It's not just the assignments that you have to submit. Homework includes all of your reading assignments for your classes, watching of videos if your instructor assigns videos to watch. It includes things like writing papers, doing other assignments, participating in discussion groups, and it includes studying for quizzes and tests. Now, part of this big picture is that we need to remember that school is not our sole obligation. We have other obligations outside of school as well. And we need to keep those in mind in terms of our planning. And for time management purposes, we have to use a planner of some sort. And I know that many people at the start of a school year, at the start of a calendar year, they go out, they pick out a great planner or calendar, and they start off with the absolute best intentions of using it. But then, we start in January, then in, say, May, we look at our planner, it's been collecting dust for a while, and it's not really helping us. Because planners only work if we use them appropriately. So we have to learn how to use a planner. Planners should help you schedule everything you need to do. Everything. But they are only as helpful as you allow them to be. It shouldn't be just for school stuff. It shouldn't be just for work stuff. It shouldn't be just for personal stuff. You shouldn't have separate planners for each aspect of your life either. All of your information should be put into one planner. The key is really about finding the right planner for you. And we'll look at some options in a bit. There are lots of different types of planners that we can use, and it's a matter of finding which planner works best for you. So, types of planners. Pretty much everybody has a smartphone or some type of electronic device, whether it's a tablet or a laptop or a desktop computer, and they all come with some built-in calendar. This can be a great planner for a lot of people. It is readily available. It allows you to set alarms or alerts. In many instances, you can share this calendar with other people in your life, whether it be family members or friends. The one or couple cons related to smartphone or device-based calendars are that the alarms and alerts can become overwhelming, and that may actually cause us to shut off our alerts, which then cause the calendar to not be particularly helpful. And in some instances, updating the OS of your device can delete some information. I know that this has happened on occasion, so it's something that's important to keep in mind. There are separate apps that you can also utilize on your electronic devices. It's an app that is separate from the calendar that comes with your device. Again, pros and cons. They're readily available. Many of them you can utilize even if you're offline, not connected to the internet. They also allow you to set alarms and alerts, and many of them also allow you to share this information with other people. However, we run the risk again of having overwhelming alarms and alerts, which, as I mentioned, can cause us to sort of shut down, turn off the alerts, and then our calendar planner app becomes rather useless. There's also the additional concern as to what happens if the app crashes and information is lost, or if by some chance the app is no longer available. For instance, it reaches a certain point, it requires an upgrade to function properly on your device. However, the app is no longer being updated. And that brings us to paper planners. Paper planners are great. They come in all different styles and sizes. They are portable. You can stick it in your backpack or your purse or your bag and bring it with you wherever. They are very easy to edit, which makes them incredibly flexible. You can add more notes, attach information, whether you use Post-its or stick papers in with paper clips, which is always recommended so you don't lose loose papers. The risk, though, is that you can lose them because we are a lot more inclined to keep a closer eye on an electronic device than we may be to keep an eye on our little paper planner. Sometimes you may buy a paper planner, and discover that it's not really helpful for you because the space that's been given to write out your task lists or your schedule isn't really big enough. And that could be a problem, which would then encourage us to stop using it. Additionally, paper planners are not really easy to share with other people unless you have something that you mount somewhere, like a wall calendar, which is great because you can see a larger period of time at a glance, and you can hang it up in your kitchen or wherever, and the people that you live with can see what it is you are doing or where you have to be at particular times on particular days. But a wall calendar, you're not going to carry it with you. So there's a good chance if you learn about things that you have to do or places you have to be when you're outside of the home, you might not always add it onto the wall calendar. Additionally, if you need to share your calendar with someone who you do not live with, it becomes rather difficult. So it's important to remember that with all of this variety in terms of styles of planners, there is a right one for you. It's a matter of trial and error to figure out which one works best for you. Maybe you use a combination of both. Personally, I use both the calendar on my smartphone, on my phone, and I use a paper planner because this way I can ensure that I have everything written down. The paper planner allows me to add additional notes to things that don't really function very well in my phone calendar. By using both the paper planner and my phone calendar, it allows me to set alerts for things that I really need to be reminded of, but the paper planner then is there as a backup for things that don't have a sense of urgency to them, or at least the same sense of urgency to them as my alarm and alert events and tasks. So once you have a planner, you've got to figure out how to use it effectively. And the first step in that is to determine what your commitments are. So as a student, you have a class schedule. You may have classes that are fully online. You may have classes that are hybrid, where part of it is online and part of it is in person at set times. You may have classes, all of your classes being in person at set times on particular days. Another thing that you should keep in mind for your class schedule is to look at your school's academic calendar for any days that classes are canceled, holiday breaks, things like that. So it's important to put that information into your planner. Then you should add in your work schedule. Now, some people have a set work schedule for months at a time or years at a time. You work a standard, you know, 8 to 4 or 7 to 3 job, you know that you can put that block of time in for an eternity, essentially. Other people have work schedules on a revolving basis. You may get a different work schedule each week or every 2 weeks. So as you get your work schedule, put it into your planner and automatically block off that time so that you know that that time is not available to you for other things. Then we have appointments. And appointments here means everything from doctor's appointments to social events. When you socialize with people, that should be considered as an appointment, so that you put it into your calendar and you know not only where you're supposed to be when, but what time is available to you to complete other tasks. And then based off of your classes, you should be able to put in due dates. Now, you might not be able to input all of that information just yet, but ideally when your classes start, you should get a syllabus and a schedule from each of your instructors, and they should list things like the assignments and due dates and office hours. Now, not all instructors give you a day-by-day breakdown of your class and the work involved. Some instructors give it to you on a weekly basis, so you know what needs to be accomplished each week. Some instructors may give you an outline as to topics that are being discussed, as well as the bigger assignments, and they may indicate simply when you have a midterm and when you have your final exam, or when you have unit tests, things like that. But any of that information that you get should be put into your schedule as soon as you get that information. Now, if you have an instructor that does not inform you of due dates until, say, the week of, again, as soon as you get those dates, you should put them into your planner. Once you know all of this, this is your sort of skeleton schedule, these commitments. Then you can start building your weekly and daily to-do lists, which help you break down your goals into manageable tasks. So when you're coming up with a to-do list, the one thing that I think most people overlook is that yes, you need to be concerned about the due date, but you also need to figure out how long it's going to take you to do the item on your to-do list. We need to figure out how long it's going to take us and sort of reverse engineer it to ensure that it's done by the due date. And we have to really be honest with ourselves. You know best at what pace you work. If you are a slower reader, perhaps add some additional time. If you take a really long time to type, maybe you are a really slow hunt and peck typer, it might take you a little bit longer to work on a paper. Overall guidelines, however, are shown here. So for reading assignments, ideally a day, 2 days, 3 days. But again, it's related to how quickly or slowly you read, and we'll talk about reading in more detail in a separate module. If you have short assignments or short papers, that would be anything less than 5 pages, start thinking about it a week or two before. On average, it takes about a week or two to complete those types of assignments. Longer papers and projects, you really should allow at least 2 weeks, but you should start adding it to your task list as soon as you get the assignment so that you're not feeling rushed as time approaches the deadline or the due date. For quizzes, you should plan to study a day or two before. Midterms, start studying at least 3 days before. Finals, start studying 5 days before. Now you'll notice for quizzes, midterms, and finals, this is a guideline as to when you should start studying. There is scientific evidence that studying the night before a quiz or a test is not particularly effective for learning purposes, but we'll talk about that much more in detail in the module on study skills. And once you have your tasks, you can prioritize them in terms of what is important. So first, I'm going to give you some examples as to what a monthly planner page and a weekly planner page could look like. These are my schedules for this month. Now we are currently on semester break, so the schedule is rather sparse. I've listed out the things that I need to do on particular days. You'll notice that there are some appointments put into the calendar so that I know where I need to be at particular times. There are hours set for certain events that are time constricted. For instance, if you look at the date of January 25th, you'll see that I have time set with tea. That's for a class that I'm teaching. I know that that time period is already blocked off because I have to be in a classroom teaching somewhere. You'll see that for the days leading up to the starts of the semesters, I have prep shown. I have things broken out simply by the day. So this is a quick way for me to see what I need to do this month. And as new things come up over the next few weeks, I can add them to this page. Then, for the month of January, I also have a weekly page for each week of the month. And it lists out the big things I need to do. So for me, I need to prep the ACE materials. I need to prep materials for courses that I'm teaching at Trocaire College, and I need to prep materials for courses that I'm teaching at Niagara County Community College. And you'll see that I have prioritized them with numbers. So ACE comes first with a number 1, and then we have the NCCC courses with the number 2, and Trocaire with the number 3. And each of those numbers then corresponds with a separate list of things that I have on my schedule to complete this week. Then over on the other side, you see that I had some appointments scheduled this week. I had to have my windshield replaced on Monday morning. I have an appointment at a bank on Friday. So I've listed this out, and I can change this information as things progress throughout the week. I can cross things off as I accomplish them. I can add new things as they come up. This is what works for me. This might not be what works for you. Your planner pages may look a little different. It took me a long time to figure out how to best use a planner for myself. Normally, I actually use just a single subject notebook and write everything out and use a wall calendar for the months. So this one is sort of a combination of the two, because I get the monthly planner page with the monthly calendar, as well as weekly planner pages that are just like a piece of notebook paper. So I can write things in the order that I think about them and then mark them with prioritization with numbers or what have you. They're just samples, but it's something to keep in mind. So I have prioritized some things, but overall, how do we prioritize? We have to figure out what tasks are truly important. The more important tasks should be addressed first. But we also need to think about when our energy level is at the highest, because you want to be doing work when you're at your best. If you think about it in terms of doing schoolwork, you may have worked a long day, you come home and you're really tired, and you look over and you see the stack of school materials and you're like, oh, I have homework to do, I've got to read this for this class, I have to do this assignment, I have to start this paper. You're already exhausted. You know that this work has to be done, so you're going to sit down and do it, but because your energy level is not at the highest, there's a good chance that you're not going to be doing your best on the things you need to do. Another thing to think about is how the tasks can be broken down. When you have larger tasks, it can sometimes feel overwhelming, so the best thing to do is to try to break them down into smaller chunks. Not only does that make it more manageable, but it allows you to give much more attention to each chunk or component of a project. So the example I give here is writing a research paper. There are several tasks involved in writing a research paper. First, you have to pick a topic, then you have to find source materials, you have to read the source materials and take some notes, you have to write a draft, you should revise that draft, and then finalize the draft before submitting it for the due date. By breaking that down, instead of just writing in your planner, research paper, but assigning yourself those specific tasks of a research paper, it certainly makes it more manageable and easier to say, oh, I've got 20 minutes I can work on picking the topic for my research paper. Or I've got an hour I can work on this. I'm going to start finding source materials, and depending on how quickly that goes, maybe even start reading some of that source material and taking notes. You also should think about breaks and rewards. It's really important to schedule breaks. It makes doing work more tolerable. Think about any situation where you have to do something for a prolonged period of time. You start to get run down, you start to get easily distracted. You want to be sure to schedule breaks. Now, science has shown that we humans work best in 52-minute chunks and then take a 17-minute break in between those chunks. Might sound kind of weird. Why not 50 minutes? Why not an hour? But no, the sweet spot is 52 minutes and then take a 17-minute break. It's quite interesting how our brains work. And I mentioned rewards. Use that break time to give yourself a little reward, whether it's playing a game on your phone or, starting up your PlayStation for 17 minutes, whether it is checking your social media, responding to text messages, making yourself a sandwich, eating 3 Oreos, whatever that reward is, build that into your schedule. It's also useful to think about our downtime. We have time every single day that we don't utilize to the best of our ability. So say, for instance, you ride the bus. You commute to school and to work by bus. You might choose to spend that time simply playing around on your phone, listening to music, watching videos, what have you. But that's not really the best use of time. Ideally, you want to think about that time as useful for more meaningful tasks. Things like reading, reviewing some notes, works great in downtime. Plus, you then get the added benefit that when you actually do get to take a break, it feels like an actual break, as opposed to riding the bus to go to work or to school. Even if you do spend that time on the phone, you don't feel particularly refreshed. It doesn't feel like a break. And we always have to remember to remain more flexible. Nothing is ever set in stone. Things happen that disrupt schedules. We just have to remember to breathe, reassess, reprioritize, and revise our lists and schedules accordingly. As I mentioned at the beginning, it seems to many of us sometimes that there are some people who just seem to have more hours in the day. And we may look at them and wonder, how do they do it? Well, part of that issue is related to some time management concerns that we ourselves experience. So let's talk about some of these time management concerns. First up is technology. We all have some type of electronic device. Chances are you spend much more time on it than you may think. If you don't believe me, check your daily usage to see how much time you actually spend on your device. You might be surprised. One of the things that you can do to combat that is turn off notifications when you're scheduled to do work on an assignment or a task, or if you have to be in class or at work or what have you, when you have something that demands your full attention. Now, with online learning, you're sitting in front of a computer. The technology is required for you to do your school stuff. So it does make that technological distraction a little bit harder to avoid. But what you can do is close all of the windows that you do not need except for the ones that you are using, say Blackboard or Zoom or what have you. You can, again, turn off your notifications. Also related to technology is the time that we spend watching, streaming, playing video games. On average, teenagers and young adults spend about 23 hours a week watching TV or streaming videos or playing video games. That's almost a whole day. Imagine how much stuff you could do if you utilized that day better. Instead, take those activities and utilize them as rewards during the time that you're actually doing work. Another concern is multitasking. Multitasking is an interesting beast because we like to say, I'm a great multitasker. I can work on multiple things at a time and get everything done. It's not a problem. But guess what? Nobody actually does it successfully. What ends up happening is we skim along the surface and we don't do our best on any of the things that we are trying to juggle at that particular time. And it actually ends up taking us longer to complete those tasks than it would if we had sat down and said, okay, task number 1, going to finish that. Cross it off the list. Let's move on to task number 2. And there was a study done back in 2018 that showed that students who were attempting to multitask during a cognition test scored 20% lower. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, 20%, but it's, in terms of school, the difference between an A and a C. So that is quite a bit of a difference. Then we've got the ever classic fear of missing out. Some of this ties into technology. We're afraid of missing the latest information on social media because social media tends to move at such an incredible speed, but don't worry, it will still be there when you finish your task. We also don't want to pass up opportunities to socialize and hang out with our friends. You can absolutely do those things. Just make sure that they fit into your schedule and that they don't take away from your necessary tasks. And then the last time management concern is probably the biggest and most common one: procrastination. If I ask a class, by a show of hands, who's a procrastinator? virtually everyone raises their hand. The interesting thing is, we may all be procrastinators, but we're not necessarily all the same type of procrastinator. So here's a list of the different kinds of procrastinators and things you can do to help overcome that. So maybe you're the perfectionist. You only want to do something when you can do it absolutely perfectly. You should remind yourself that you need to be a little bit more realistic. You can always go back and make improvements on something, like an assignment or a paper or a project, but you actually have to get it done first in order to do that. By procrastinating and leaving it off until when you think you can do it the right way, there's a good chance that you're not doing it the right way anyway. You might be the dreamer procrastinator where, oh, if only I could get this done. I've got this great idea, but I just can't. Well, break it down into smaller, more manageable tasks. Make smaller goals out of this big goal, which you'll see is a common response to these different types of procrastination. If you're the worrier, oh, I don't know how I'm ever going to get this done. Again, break it down into smaller, more manageable parts. Or maybe you're the procrastinator who says, oh, I work best under pressure. I work best with a hot deadline. That's when I give it my all. It's probably time to look for someplace else to get that adrenaline rush. Take up a competitive sport, play video games, go shoot zombies on the screen or something like that. Sometimes we procrastinate because we want to do things at our own pace. We don't want to be concerned with deadlines. Well, it's important to remember that pretty much everything has deadlines, has timelines, whether it's your schoolwork with a due date for an assignment, or your job, which requires you to be there at a particular time and finish at a particular time, and again, perhaps have tasks that are due on particular days. And your personal life, bills have to be paid on time. You have needs that need to be met at particular times. As much as we might like to think that we are the center of the universe, we are not. And we need to overcome that and realize that we are all part of a much larger system and nothing works solely as we want it to work. And then there's the overdoer. I've got too much to do. I can't do anything because I've got too much to do. Well, first, try not to take on so much. But then prioritize those tasks and break those tasks down into much more manageable steps. So the one thing that's in common with all of these is taking your task or your goal and breaking it down into smaller steps. Can help you avoid procrastination because you're not leaving everything until the last minute. You're working on it in smaller chunks that are much more easy to accomplish. Then there are some things that we do because we think they help, but they don't actually help. And these are related to reading and note-taking, which we will talk about in separate modules, but I did want to touch on them here so that you keep them in mind when you are scheduling your time for activities. So for instance, underlining and highlighting when you read. A lot of people think of that as a way to speed up the reading process because they're not taking separate notes. I've highlighted the article, I've underlined stuff in the article, so I don't have to write anything down on a separate piece of paper. But it leads to some problems. Frequently, we don't know what to actually underline or highlight. So we either highlight way too much or we don't highlight enough and we lose the connection between the information and ideas that's being presented. So we're not looking at the overall relationship of concepts or processes. We're looking at these little tiny tidbits. So again, underlining and highlighting, it's sort of a Goldilocks thing. You don't want to do too much. You don't want to do too little. Those tend to be where we fall instead of doing the just right amount. So keep in mind that while it may take you an hour to read and highlight or underline an article, you should allow for a little bit longer so that you can read the article and actually take notes that demonstrate your understanding of what you read. But again, we'll talk about reading in a later module. And then we have taking lecture notes by typing. As an instructor, I frequently see students come into class, they pull out a tablet or open up a laptop, and they start typing notes. Well, the incentive seems to be that that saves them time because it's nice and neat. They can go back and read it more easily instead of what they may scribble down in a notebook. However, it actually slows you down because you become so focused on essentially taking dictation or typing everything that the instructor says that you can actually miss things. And if you're not missing things, what's happening is you are not actually absorbing the content or the information and turning it into knowledge. Another thing that occurs when you're sitting in a classroom typing notes on a laptop or tablet is that you now have all of those technological distractions readily available to you. So you may have the best of intentions and sit there with your laptop and take notes, and then you get a pop-up, and before you know it, you're scrolling some type of social media or Googling, or you find yourself deeply invested in a Wikipedia article about the invention of Swiss cheese. So even though they may seem like shortcuts, they do not really provide any benefit. So how do we recap all of this? Two things are really the important factor here. One, use a planning tool. Planning tools are vital to keep you on task and manage your time. What that planning tool is solely up to you. And knowing your downfalls. Are you a procrastinator? What type of procrastinator are you? When do you work best over the course of the day? When are you at your most alert? Knowing those things will help you take better control of your time management.